पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर् द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे astu shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu. Sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani. Sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu. Sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. We'll sing That Man God Loves on page 16. Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Among all the parts of our personality, the most elusive, but in some sense, the most closest to us is the sense of I, the ego. Even to understand what ego is, we need ego. So this is something that is worth reflecting on, and that will be our theme for reflection this morning. I, the sense of I, and what it does and what it can do for us. Now, I is a single word. It's a pronoun, and when this word I is uttered, we hear a sound, and it refers to some entity. And in this instance, every one of us, we say I. That entity is myself, the me of every one of us. And this is something that has been studied in different traditions. The relationship between the word, the sound, and the object that it refers to. These are three distinct things, really. The word, the sound that is produced when the word is uttered, and the object that is referred to. In fact, sometimes this relationship between the word, the sound, and the object is discussed in relation to even to the creation of the world. For instance, when we say, God said, let there be light. So a word was uttered, light, and a sound was produced, and then light appeared into this creation. And so on. So it's a big science in itself, the word, the sound, and the object. The object can be either outside of us or inside of us. And the word outside and inside are relative because there is some boundary is always implied when you say something is outside or something is inside. And usually, whenever we use the term outside or inside in terms of ourselves, the boundary is usually the body. So everything that is outside the body, objects that are outside the body, are seen through the senses, whether it is sight, sounds, and so on. We use the eyes, ears, and so on. The objects that are inside are sensed by the mind. For instance, how do I know that I'm happy or I'm sad? So the experience of happiness, the knowledge of happiness comes because the happiness, we don't think of happiness as an object because it just seems so close to us, but it is an object of the mind. So things which are inside us are perceived by the mind. The things which are outside of us, we need the mind also, but we need the senses as well. Now it's important to remember that the pronoun I is only a pointer. It's a name given to an entity. And what Vedanta tries to grapple with is what is this object or what is this entity referred to by the pronoun I. Now, the body clearly is a part of it, which is why I can now say, I am standing here, I am speaking, and clearly I'm using the word I, because what is really standing here is the body. What is where the action of speaking is occurring is through the body. And so while it seems normal to say, I'm standing and I'm speaking, if you reflect on it, I'm just saying I'm using the word I to refer to the body. But sometimes we also use the word I to refer to our mind. When I say I'm happy or I'm excited. Now, happiness is a state of the mind. Although that happiness may show itself in physically, and the joy, for instance, when you smile, the smile is an expression of joy. Now, the smiling itself occurs in the body. But what triggers that smiling, that sense of joy, that occurs in the mind. So when I say I'm happy, it's really I'm applying that term I to my mind. Similarly with the intellect. So when I say my knowledge, I know. So it's good to recognize that this term I gets referred to the body, mind, intellect, and all of these things. And because it is something that we have been doing all along, it just feels completely natural and effortless. But if we begin to think about it, we're really, our I hovers, sometimes in the body, sometimes on the mind, sometimes on the intellect, sometimes with all of these three taken together. But it just seems like one whole. The I that attaches itself to all of these parts of our personality, which gives them a sense of this I sense, that is the ego. And this ego that all of us have serves some important functions. Now, just one technicality, although sometimes we say, oh, this person has a big ego, I think it's helpful to distinguish between ego and egoism. Ego, in a real sense of the term, there's nothing terribly bad about it. I mean, ego is simply the sense of I, that's it. Egoism would be then that I getting puffed up with different characteristics. So egoism is problematic. But simple ego, the sense of I, is not, it's a problem in the ultimate sense, but not okay, just to recognize that sometimes we use the word ego to mean egoism. But whenever I'm using the word ego right now, it's only in the sense of I, not in the sense of egoism. So this ego, the sense of I, serves some very useful functions. Now, among the functions it serves, the first function is the I is a separator. I separates me from everything that is not I. And we have seen this on earlier occasions, that when we were born, for the first few days or weeks, the little baby has no sense of I. At least that's what experts in the field have come to the conclusion. So you're very young, immediately after birth, I think, well, we all have passed through that stage, but we don't remember it. But it seems clear that just by the fact that the first thing that a baby does after birth is cry, it just seems that it must be very traumatic to suddenly find ourselves into this world. I don't think we are able to articulate it, what exactly is happening, but it definitely seems to be a state of confusion, if not of anything else. But it takes a while for a little baby to recognize that I am someone, that I hasn't come. So it's just the world is still one continuous whole. Until the birth occurs, the baby is literally the part of the mother's body. But even after birth, it takes a while for the baby to recognize I am someone. And when that first sense of I occurs in the baby, it comes along with the sense of not I. Again, we are too young then to articulate exactly what we feel. But as we grow older and we are able to better understand and express our thoughts, even if we don't express it to someone else, but deep inside, we begin to recognize more and more that if I am this, then everything other than this is not me. And all the vulnerabilities and insecurities that we experience really spring from that knowledge of I. Because we discover that that which is not I is much bigger, it's much more powerful. Sure, there is a great thrill in being that I am someone, but to recognize that all of this is not me and all of this is a lot more powerful, that there are forces out there over which I have no control, that does create concerns, that does create anxiety. And as we grow older, instead of that anxiety becoming less, it in fact increases. Because then we are no longer just thinking about our physical survival. Then it's about we speak about clash of personalities. So sometimes it goes at the emotional level, at the intellectual level. So the sense of I separates us. It gives us an identity, but it also separates us from other people. The I helps us connect with our own body and mind. But as it helps us connect with our body and mind, it also disconnects us from everything else. The second function of I is it's a coordinator and a unifier. Imagine a big organization with thousands of employees, each with a specialized job, and no one there to coordinate the various departments and activities. We know many of us in our workplaces see that there are a bunch of people working together, but there has to be someone to coordinate what's going on. So without that coordinator, without that unifier, there would be chaos. Same thing with on air travel, with hundreds of flights taking off and landing, and if there is no control tower, then again there's going to be chaos. No one in charge of coordinating the air traffic. Same thing with regard to hospitals, for instance. There are just a few examples. There are doctors, nurses, so many patients, and the tests being done, appointments, and so on. And there has to be someone to coordinate all these activities. Now, thanks to technology, a lot of this has become easier. But even then, well, you need someone to take care of your tech department, even in these big corporations. So there has to be someone to coordinate. That is what the ego does. That's what the I does. Because our body and mind, small though it may be, it's a very complex structure, as most of us recognize. There are hundreds and thousands of functions going on, small and big, inside this. In fact, this is something you may have heard also, that there are so many nerves and all these functions that are occurring within us that if something goes wrong in the body, that's not a surprise. And the probability of things going wrong, considering so many moving parts and different parts there are, is really tremendous. The fact that most of the time nothing goes wrong, that most of the time most of the things work as they should, that is a wonder. But we need some coordinator, someone to unify all the functions of the body and mind. And that's what the ego does. It is this sense of I that gives a unity to our personality. That each of us feels that I'm a person, not just a collection of limbs. And that would be just things. So if this hand does something, this hand doesn't, I have no idea what's going on. That would be chaos. And so the ego does serve an important function in our lives. And a third function that the ego serves is that it makes an identity. Nowadays, I think there are some, what are they called? They create, no, I thought I knew the name. That is, if there are now professional entities which image makers, or is it something like that? No, not hologram. It is like the people who kind of like PR department in some sense. In a sense, like people who go into, even for sports or actors or people in public office, to kind of image building. So there are professional people who will then set these for a public profile for these people and arrange for them interviews here and there to make them come in the public eye. It's kind of building a brand, so to speak, in public place. I, the sense of I, that is what the sense of I does. It builds up our image. In fact, the answer to the question, who am I, or the kind of answer that any of us would give if someone were to ask us, who are you? Each answer that we give will refer to a specific identity. And we know that if someone were to ask us the question, who are you? The answers could be different, even by the same person. It just depends on the context. We probably might, most of us probably would just say what our name is. But then that who are you can depend on the context as well. It's like if you are at the ball game and say the Sox and the Yankees are playing, and you are not wearing any specific cap or insignia to show which side you belong to, and someone asks you, who are you? Clearly, they're not asking you whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or whatever. They're essentially asking what your identity as related to that context is, whether you're a Sox fan or a Yankees fan. And therefore, sometimes when you wear a specific cap, you are affirming your identity as related to that. So, in different contexts, in different places, and we have these multiple identities. And these identities don't clash because in the political sphere, we might have a certain identity. Then among our hobbies and interests, we might have certain identities. Then relation-wise, we have different identities. The same person can simultaneously be a son, a father, a cousin, and so on. So we have different identities, and these identities usually don't clash with each other. What we may find that over time, one of these identities may become more prominent than the other. But many of these identities are there. Many of these identities are very general. I mean, at the very least, one common identity that we all have is, say, who are you? I'm a human being. Well, that would seem to be a very obvious answer. But when I say I'm a human being, I'm already separating myself from the animal kingdom, from the plant kingdom. So every identity, while it announces our membership for a certain group, it also simultaneously separates us from people who don't belong to that group. So whichever of these identities becomes dominant, then that determines the tenor of my life. So people, for instance, now who are deep into politics, that's either a part of their job or that's their profound, they're just thinking politically all the time. So that way, then for such a person, their political identity might be the dominant identity. So when we say that I'm a religious person or I'm a spiritual person, we can truly call ourselves spiritual if, among all the different identities that we have, spiritual identity is one of the many identities. For instance, it's possible for someone to say, I'm a devotee of God, I'm a believer in God, or I'm a child of God. Whichever way we connect ourselves to our spiritual ideals. Now that, at present, it just objectively is only one of the many identities that we have. Now, if I have to say that spirituality is important to me, or spiritual life is important to me, or I see myself primarily as a spiritual person, then I have to ask myself, in the course of the day, right from the moment I wake up till I go to sleep, how often do I affirm my spiritual identity? How, you don't have to go on announcing to everybody that you are a child of God, but how often in the course of the day, as I go about carrying my duties and responsibilities in life, do I do so with the idea that I'm a child of God? Or I'm the Atman, or I'm the Spirit. Whichever, again, there is no one fixed way to express our spiritual identity. But we have to really reflect deeply on it. At the very least, we can say that when we pray, when we meditate, twice a day or thrice a day, hopefully, at least during that time, our spiritual identity becomes uppermost. If it becomes uppermost at that time, then distractions should not be a problem. One of the reasons when we say I find difficult to concentrate when I pray or meditate, what is essentially happening is that my other identities related to my workplace or identities related to my other interests in life, they are not allowing my spiritual identity to come up, to have some space, even during those few minutes that I am praying or meditating. Now, if I want my spiritual identity to be uppermost, at least during the time I'm praying and meditating, then it can't be at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, rest of the time. It's like this. If you have a lot of stuff in your barrel, the things which you use most often will be usually on the surface. And things which you rarely use will ultimately go to the bottom. And if I want, therefore, my spiritual identity to come up and make my practice of prayer and meditation a joyful practice, then I need to find a way to keep my spiritual identity somewhere at the top. If not at the topmost level, at least somewhere at the top. So anytime I can just pick it up. And one way of doing that would be to find creative ways throughout the day to affirm that identity. And affirming that identity, just affirming to yourself, as I said. It's not a public activity. And affirming that identity doesn't take even 1 second. It's not even asking too much. But if I can find a way that in the course of the day, maybe once every hour, at least, I can just say to yourself, whatever your connection with God is, what your spiritual ideal is. Or if you have a mantra, repeat the mantra once an hour. That's too much, not too much to ask. And just repeat it once if you don't have much time. But the idea is, the more often I find the opportunity to affirm my spiritual identity this way, it will become easier the next time I sit down to pray and meditate. Distractions will be fewer. And so that's what we have to see. What is among the many identities I have, among the many different ways I can describe who I am, what is my dominant identity? Which of my many eyes, not eyes, which of my many, how else to say, I don't know how to plural, which of my many senses in which I use the word I, which is most dominant? I think that's very important. Now, the relationship of this I with the body and mind. The sense of I, of course, doesn't own the body. It is only, as I said, a coordinator or a manager. And the real owner of the body is the Atman, the spirit. In fact, theoretically at least, the body and mind are only instruments under the control of the spirit. That is how it was meant to be. But that's not how it is right now in the case of many people, where the body and mind are no longer instruments. In fact, the body and mind have become, think about it this way. If there is no coordinator, or a coordinator or manager has just gone for a long vacation and no one has taken that person's place, then everybody in the company is going to think, well, I get to decide what I want. And so they do pretty much what they want. And after that coordinator or a manager comes after a long vacation, by which time the others have gotten used to doing the things the way they wanted, then it will be very difficult to bring them under control again. And that's essentially what had happened. You want to concentrate, some work that needs concentration, you sit, and after some time, the body refuses to sit and says, no, I just want to go and have a cup of coffee or something. Or the mind refuses to concentrate. So the body and mind, if they become instruments which are not under our control, then that creates a difficulty. The spirit is the owner of them. The spirit is in Vedantic terms, it's called the pure consciousness, or it's in theistic language, the spirit is the God dwelling in our own heart. Now, why can't we see the spirit? If spirit is the owner and spirit is who we are, why can't we see it? And the answer given in the Upanishads, it is that it is covered. It is covered, and it gets described, either it's covered in 3 layers or 5 layers, essentially just covered with layers. And we have seen on other occasions what those layers are. Sometimes when we spoken of as covered in 3 layers, so there is this outermost layer, the layer of the body, and then there is a subtler layer, the layer of the mind, intellect, and ego. And a 3rd layer is the layer of ignorance. And the word that gets used in Sanskrit for these 3 layers is sharira. Now, sharira often gets translated as body in English. And so sometimes they call these 3 as the gross body, sthula sharira, the subtle body, sukshma sharira, and the causal body, the karana sharira. But sharira, the 3 bodies kind of sounds odd because we have a certain idea, a certain image. Again, the word, the sound, and the object. So we have a certain idea already existing about what a body is. But the Sanskrit word sharira, if you go to the root meaning of the term, shiryate iti shariram. So sharira literally means that which wears away, that which is not permanent. So that is what these layers are. That these layers are there, but none of these are eternal. The body we know, that layer goes away 100 years, plus or minus. That's around time the human layer stays. The mind, which is more subtle, which stays much longer. And the ignorance and the body and the mind, they remain for a pretty long time. But ultimately, when what we speak about as moksha or freedom or nirvana, the different ways goal of life is described, when that is attained, then this layer, inner layer, subtler layer also goes away. Sri Ramakrishna says, and I'm quoting his words, I and mine, these constitute ignorance. My house, my wealth, my learning, my possessions, the attitude that prompts one to say such things comes of ignorance. On the contrary, the attitude born of knowledge is, O God, you are the master, and all these things belong to you. House, family, children, attendants, friends are yours. The idea is, as I said before, in spite of the good functions that the eye sense does, then the downside to that is the eye disconnects us from all. The more it disconnects us from outside, the smaller we get, the more suffering there is, because the not me is much vaster. And that's essentially the basic problem of life, is suffering. That's what the conclusion the Buddha came to as well, that the problem of suffering. And the suffering, he traced it to desire. The cause of that suffering is desire. And desire is nothing but seeking what we don't have. If we already have something, then we have no desire for it. So desire necessarily implies an awareness that I don't have something, the recognition that I do need it, and then I desire it. And so therefore, the smaller my I gets, there's a much larger things that are outside of me, which I don't have, which I would like to have. And so the only way to people say, get rid of all desires. Spiritual life say, desires are demonized in every way. But the problem is simply this. As long as I feel I lack something and I need it, I'm going to desire it. There's just no getting away from that fact. The only way to stop desiring is to recognize I don't lack anything. But it's not just saying I don't lack anything if I feel I'm lacking things. And so that is why in Vedanta, they look deeply at this I. That this I, which presently looks so small to me, is it really that small? Because if it really is small, then there is nothing you can do about it. We're going to forever remain vulnerable. We are going to forever worry and be anxious and be stressful. There's nothing you can do about it. And so Vedanta says, look deeply at the I. Who is this I? And then we have seen how it says, well, is this I the body? No. And that's the Nirvana Shatakam that we sing here so often, is really just looking deeply at that I and saying, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the ego. So everything that limits me, everything that makes me feel I'm small, those layers are peeled away. When those layers are peeled away, there is no boundary. If there is no boundary, then my I fills everything and everyone. If my I fills everyone, then there is nothing and no one where my I is not. In other words, I don't lack anything because there is nothing which I am not. There is nothing outside of me. Now this is still, at present, just might seem very theoretical. It might seem speculative. But it's good to know that this was not simply a theory that a bunch of professors sat together and arrived at. That this way of affirmation has been experienced by these enlightened ones of the past. And what they said was, this was not something unique only to them. What they said was, this is what we have observed, this is what we have experienced. And everyone, at any time, at any place, has the ability to experience the same thing. So, if we haven't done it yet, there is no one to blame. Swami Vivekananda's that song of the Sannyasin, he says, thine only is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. So we feel we are being dragged somewhere, and we can complain about it. There is a lot of people find consolation in just affirming their victimhood. Well, I'm the victim, what can I do? That's why I'm suffering. And what Vedanta says is no amount of crying that way really is going to help. I have to take charge of my own life. And then I will discover that I'm not really being dragged anywhere. No one has tied my hands. I'm really holding the rope that is dragging me on. And all that I need to do is just let go. And most of us, at some time or the other in life, have known how difficult it is to let go. I was just speaking the other day with a person, with a spiritual seeker, known him for a long time. And so he their children have grown up, and so he and his wife live in a big house in the suburbs. And clearly, they're still working, and they have to commute long distances, and life is not fun anymore because so much of your time you've become elderly, you're working, you have to commute. And I said to them, well, if you're commuting to the city from the distant suburb, why don't you just sell off your home and then get an apartment in the city somewhere? So your commute will be less, and then you don't have to take care of such a big property because children have grown up and they are moved away anyway. So you don't need such a big house for two people. It was easy for me to say that, of course, but and then they did say that they were thinking about it, but then on the other hand they said over the years so many things have gotten accumulated which they know they are never going to use, which they don't need. And I'm just saying that this is not the story of just one family, but in one form or the other, we will see that things accumulate, not just material things, even friends, and in at different levels, things come around us, and even when we know that many of these things we don't need, many of these things may be even an obstacle in our just being happy, we are not able to let go. So letting go is tough. So that's what Ramakrishna is referring to here, that this I and mine, as long as this I is limited, it's not able to let go of the things which don't truly belong to I. We are going to feel unhappy in life, or at least we won't experience that deepest fulfillment which we all seek. Here is another words of Sri Ramakrishna from the Gospel. He said, I and mine, that is ignorance. By discriminating, you will realize that what you call I is really nothing but Atman. Reason it out. Are you the body or the flesh or something else? At the end, you will know that you are none of these. You are free from attributes. Then you will realize that you have never been the doer of any action, that you have been free from virtue and faults alike, that you are beyond righteousness and unrighteousness, beyond dharma and adharma. Now, many of us understand what is being said here, but it's still very cerebral, still very intellectual. Somehow, if this makes sense to us, we have to find a way to live according to make this a part of our life, not just intellectual life, but our day-to-day life. We know that Sri Ramakrishna made a distinction between what he called the unripe I and the ripe I. He said the ripe, now the idea is simple enough that it's difficult to let go of the sense of I. So rather than trying something which seems near impossible, not really impossible, but very near impossible, Sri Ramakrishna says, what would be a little bit easier is to use our option to connect this I to our spiritual ideal, rather than connecting it to something else. So whenever my I is connected with a perishable entity, it will bring some joy, but that joy will also be perishable. But if I can connect my I with a non-perishable entity, which really in spiritual life is only God, so in one way or the other, if my I is connected with God, in whichever way that comes naturally to us, that I has the potential to bring us great joy, great fulfillment. And so that is what Ramakrishna called the ripe I, the ego of being, I am a child of God. Well, that's an ego, but that ego of being a child of God is a better ego than the other kinds of egos that we have. Of course, I mean, it's good to recognize if I'm a child of God, so I'm a child of God and you people are all useless, that doesn't work. So when you say I'm a child of God, it's a recognition that just like me, everyone is a child of God. Then only I can say that my being a child of God has become my true identity. It's like this. Whatever is our identity at present determines how we recognize others. For instance, now, because we effortlessly feel that we are human beings, we don't have to read any scripture for it. We don't have to remind every morning, I am a human being. No, it's very effortless. Now, because that is effortless, it's effortlessly I can see everybody as human beings. I don't have any problem with it. I don't have to think twice about saying, well, there are all these human beings in front of me. But not with so much ease can most people say, all these are children of God. The reason I'm not able to see children of God outside of me, because I'm not able to see the child of God within me. So just as effortlessly I see myself as a human being, if I see myself as a divine being, then the natural way, not just intellectually, but the more I try to live as if I'm a child of God, as if I'm divine, then it will become easier for me to see everybody as divine. And so affirming being a child of God means whenever I have to take certain important decisions in life, whenever I have to make choices in life, I have to then ask myself, in this situation, is this what a child of God would do? Is this what someone who believes in God do? That's what affirming our identity means. It's not just kind of saying something and feeling good about it. It's actually applying it in the daily situations of life. So Sri Ramakrishna said that it's the ripe eye which brings us peace, joy, and contentment, and it's the unripe eye which keeps us in ignorance, produces stress, anxiety, and fear. The ripe eye, Sri Ramakrishna said, produces knowledge. And this is what he said. These are his words. He says, how does that ripe eye, that knowledge manifest in the expression of a devotee? He says, "O God, you alone do everything. You alone are my own, and you alone belong, and to you alone belongs houses, buildings, family, relatives, friends, the whole world. All is yours." And it is the ignorance that makes one feel, I'm doing everything. I'm the doer. House, buildings, family, children, friend, property are all mine. So again, it's just this yours and mine. That's what creates the difference between knowledge and ignorance. And then Sri Ramakrishna has told many stories, and those of you who have read the Gospel of Ramakrishna know many stories by which he drove home the point that the more we reflect on these deeper issues of life, we will see that it's God alone who is truly our own. And to the extent we are able to see everyone, understand all relationships in and through God, that everyone can become my own as well. But if any kind of a connection we establish without bringing God into the picture, then that does lead to pain and suffering. So there is no problem in seeing my family, my friends, my work, everything as mine, provided I recognize that they have actually come to me through God's grace. That God has given me, they all belong to God. God has given them to me to take care of them. It's like if your neighbor is going on a long leave and then says, could you please take care of our dog for 6 months? And of course, if you love your neighbor, even though it's not yourself, you will still say, okay, we'll take care of that dog. Now, maybe unusually, if there are little children at home, they can get very attached very quickly. And dogs are very good at just making you feel you are the best person in the world. So people get quickly attached to them. And then after 6 months, when you have developed an attachment to them, and then the neighbor comes and says, okay, and then it'll be going to be painful to give away the dog with whom you have established a relationship, provided you remember that 6 months ago this dog was not ours to begin with. Now, everything that comes to us in life, whether it's material possessions or people, everything, they were not ours to begin with. At different points in life, they have come to us in one way or the other. And whenever God wishes to take them away or move them someplace else, God can do it. And to recognize that is a way when we can love everyone, love our work, love the people around us, love your family, love your friends, but recognize that ultimately they all belong to God. That was the message that Ramakrishna gave. And one important point, and this is going to sound paradoxical, the more we remember that everyone around us belongs to God, our family and friends, they all belong to God, the more we'll be able to love them. It might seem as if not, but that's not true. If we love God and if everyone belongs to God, we'll be able to love the people around us more if that connection is established through a spiritual outlook. That is what Ramakrishna is stressing. So, to conclude, one daily practice that all of us can do is to daily check where my eye is. And that one way would be immediately after waking up in the morning to affirm my identity. Most people have found it useful to begin the day, even when you wake up, you're still lying in your bed, maybe just mentally repeat your mantra or say a short prayer. And done with concentration, not mechanically, done with concentration, that is a way of affirming my spiritual identity. The way, oftentimes in many Indian languages, the greeting, oftentimes when we say, how are you? In many Indian languages, there is a word called swastha. Are you swastha? Now, the word swastha often gets translated as, are you healthy? As opposed to sickness is called aswastha. But if you go to the root meaning, swa, in Sanskrit means the self. Stha means to be established in it. And so swastha means, if you literally translate that word, it really means, are you established in yourself? And so literally it would mean, only when I affirm my Atman identity, my true identity, I can be considered truly healthy. And that is why sometimes the state of ignorance itself is called a disease or a sickness. The word that gets used is called bhava roga. Bhava means this creation and roga is disease. So this disease or this that of multiplicity, diversity, and therefore some God is then referred to as bhava roga vaidya, a physician who cures this disease of worldliness. So these are the terms that are used. Totapuri, the Ramakrishna's Vedanta teacher, he had this a vessel in which he drank water, a brass vessel. And every day we read in Ramakrishna's life, Totapuri would spend time cleaning that vessel well. And it was always shining. And then he used that as a metaphor to show that our mind is like that vessel. If we don't clean it every day, it just remains uncared for a long time, then it'll acquire layers by which we'll be even go deeper into this morass of ignorance. And so the daily practice of prayer, meditation is a way of cleaning our mind. It's a form of self-purification. So there is a lot that we can reflect on this idea of I and how it controls our life, how what role it plays in our life, and how we can use this sense of I to elevate ourselves, to go beyond the limitations that we have, rather than making this I something that brings us greater pain and suffering in life. So there is much that we can reflect on this. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Let us meditate for a minute now in silence. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.